Is New York City's Zohran Mamdani's minimum wage agenda good for working class Americans? Or does it represent yet another trip down a dead-end street for the Democratic Party? You're about to find out. I'm Todd, and this is the On Wealth and Progress podcast. If you're interested in balanced, factually supported commentary for a better future, you've come to the right place. Many Democrats have expressed concern that Zohran Mamdani's stunning victory in New York City's mayoral primary shines a harsh socialist light on the party that won't reflect well in general elections. But even more importantly, Democrats should be asking, will Mr. Mamdani's policies actually help or harm his most vulnerable constituencies? A brief review of the modern Democratic Party and of Mr. Mamdani's policy agenda sheds revealing light on these important concerns. In the 1990s, Bill Clinton was fortunate to inherit an economic boom previously kicked off by Ronald Reagan's free market reforms. Clinton had the rare political wisdom to recognize he had been dealt a winning hand and the courage to lead the modern Democratic Party in a new direction. Instead of fighting business and free market prosperity, Clinton endorsed them. He famously announced that the era of big government is over, worked with Newt Gingrich and a Republican Congress to balance the budget, and helped create what Adam Smith might have called a light touch of regulation that enabled America to lead the world in the development and advancement of the internet. Now, in retrospect, it's easy to forget just how successful Clinton's pro-business agenda was, not only for America, but also for his party. He was the first Democrat to win 2 or more presidential elections since Franklin Roosevelt in 1940. But then Barack Obama, along with many others, misdiagnosed the great financial crisis by blaming it on deregulation. As I show in my book, the actual causes were the government housing policies and the Federal Reserve. But as a result of his misdiagnosis, Mr. Obama shifted the party's direction away from what had worked so well for Clinton and toward a new progressivism that harkened back to LBJ's Great Society programs in the 1960s. In addition to ramping up regulation, Mr. Obama tried to spend his way out of the Great Recession by driving peacetime budget deficits to an all-time high. But instead of generating an accelerated recovery, ramped up spending and heavy regulation produced anemic growth and a dangerous increase in debts that left us ill-prepared for the COVID-19 emergency. Let's compare Clinton and Obama's second terms. Clinton ran budget surpluses, ended his second term with safe debts, and presided over healthy annual growth, adjusted for the 2001 recession, of 3.4%. By contrast, Obama ran large deficits, which pushed debt up to dangerous levels, and oversaw annual economic growth of just 2.5%. While Mr. Obama's personal popularity helped disguise the failure of his progressive policies, the anemic growth, deficits, and dangerous debts that characterized his term helped elect Donald Trump to the presidency in 2016. Joe Biden leaned on his more moderate centrist appeal to defeat Trump in 2020. But after retaking office, his administration doubled down on Obama's spending and regulatory mistakes. Once again, all we got in return was anemic growth and a bout of inflation that reminded everyone of what happened after LBJ's spending blowout in the late 1960s. All of which then contributed to Donald Trump's improbable re-election in 2024. Having now lost twice to Mr. Trump, Mr. Mamdani's victory in the New York primary creates a powerful impression that the Democratic Party has yet to learn from its mistakes. Rather than embracing what worked so well for Mr. Clinton, the party instead seems to be moving back toward what failed in the 1960s for LBJ, in the 2010s for Obama, and in the 2020s for Biden. Given what we now know of Mr. Biden's mental condition, it's reasonable to surmise that the socialist wing of the party played an outsized role in shaping the Biden policy agenda. And indeed, AOC, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren have all endorsed Mr. Mamdani, whose platform includes massive spending on government housing, government-run grocery stores, and a rent freeze on much of the city's residential housing. In addition, Mr. Mamdani's plan to combat New York City's affordability problem also includes hiking the minimum wage from $16.50 an hour today to $30 an hour in 2030, or by almost 13% a year. Now, interestingly, Los Angeles just enacted a new $30 minimum wage for hotel workers to be phased in through 2028, which means pushing wages up by nearly 14% a year. In comparison, Clinton increased the national minimum wage by only a little over 2% a year during his two highly successful terms. So, does the 33-year-old Mr. Mamdani and the LA City Council know something that escaped Mr. Clinton when it comes to promoting upward mobility and democratic success? Or are these minimum wage measures likely to follow the economic and political merry-go-round that has plagued the party and its constituents for the past 60 years? Let's take a short break, and then we'll look more closely at minimum wages. Imagine coming across the following job posting. Join the wait list for a career that offers a 25% risk of death, an even greater risk of suffering non-fatal wounds or injuries, and a near certainty of multiple arrests. Starting pay, $3.30 an hour. As heartbreaking and unimaginable as this seems, this hypothetical ad actually reflects the harsh reality that faced young, black urban men in Chicago during the mid-1990s. In Freakonomics, authors Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner presented a remarkable story of an intrepid young sociologist who managed to befriend and gain acceptance to the Black Disciples, an inner-city gang of crack cocaine dealers. As time went on, one gang member, feeling guilty about the harm they were doing in their own community, went so far as to hand the young student a stack of spiral notebooks containing their surprisingly sophisticated financial records. These records had been created by the gang's leader, who had gone to business school and worked in corporate America before coming back to the inner city because, as the authors described it, being in corporate America made him feel like, quote, a white man working at Afro Sheen headquarters, end of quote. After studying the records, the Freakonomics authors wrote, So how did the gang work? An awful lot like American businesses, actually, though perhaps none more so than McDonald's. In fact, they went on to write, if you were to hold a McDonald's organizational chart and a Black Disciples org chart side by side, you could hardly tell the difference. End quote. But we might ask, why would young men take on entry-level positions, exposing them to such grave dangers, to do something they knew was hurting a community they lived in and obviously cared about, for so little compensation? The Freakonomics authors concluded that the lure was much like a tournament that offers outsized rewards to a few big winners. They compared the motivation to a young high school quarterback working out every morning because he dreams of making it to the NFL. Well, I actually played quarterback in high school. And when I was even younger, I did dream of one day becoming a professional. But by the time I reached high school, it was abundantly clear to me that playing under Friday night lights was as far as my career was going to go, which is something almost every other player on our team realized about themselves as well. Further, if I had grown up watching 1 in 4 of the high school football players I idolized die on Kingston Stadium's field, I would have spent more time in the Washington High School gym shooting baskets. And not, as the authors suggest, because I had any expectation of making it into the NBA, but rather because it represented the next best outlet available for my athletic energies. Returning to the author's comparison to McDonald's, I also worked in corporate America for many years. And while a very small percentage of people taking jobs in big companies do so because they dream of one day becoming CEO, the vast majority do so because it's the best opportunity they have to try and provide a better life for their families. Which is to say that, while the author's tournament analogy provides a reasonable theory for why some workers were attracted into the Black Disciples, there is also another important explanation. Simply put, many young people join gangs because minimum wage laws make it illegal for legitimate businesses to offer much safer entry-level positions at similar pay rates. Let's take another short break, and then we'll dive a little deeper into minimum wages. Now, if you ask people who spend their lives studying sophisticated statistical and econometric modeling techniques about the effect of minimum wages on employment, they're likely to tell you that advanced studies comparing minimum wage schemes in similar markets indicate that relatively small increases in such wages don't hurt employment levels. But these studies are inherently flawed. Because we've had minimum wages for so long, all such studies are forced to draw conclusions from comparisons of one minimum wage regime to another. The results can be a bit like saying communism in the Soviet Union was a disaster, but at least it was better than what happened in China. In other words, because we've more or less had minimum wages since the Great Depression, modern economic history has no way of revealing what kind of organic growth might have occurred if inner city entrepreneurs had been able to pay wages that enabled them to provide goods and services that were affordable to their local communities. In my recent piece on immigration, I noted that from 1866 to 1913, we absorbed roughly 25 million impoverished immigrants from abroad, while producing perhaps the greatest sustained upsurge of working class standards the world has ever seen. Care to hazard a guess about minimum wages during this period? If you guess there weren't any, you're correct. After all, there's a good reason this was called the limited government era. It's probably safe to say that few, if any, of the entrepreneurs who created this sustained tsunami of upward mobility had PhDs in econometric modeling or advanced statistics. But like most business owners, especially local ones, today, and the Black Disciples gang leaders, they almost certainly had a sound grasp of two concepts that are actually critical to founding and building successful businesses: return on investment and risk and reward. Anyone who has managed to scrape together some investment capital can either A, put it in something relatively safe and secure, or B, take on the risk of starting a business, which they will only do if the expected reward is sufficiently higher than their safer alternatives. But if the government imposes an artificial floor for important costs like wages, it will force entrepreneurs to raise prices in order to make a return on investment that justifies the risk of starting a business. But by raising prices, a local business owner will limit the number of people who can afford to buy their products. This will reduce the expected return and serve as a disincentive to take the risk of starting a business in the first place. Which is to say that the high-powered PhDs advising politicians on minimum wages would be wise to go back and restudy their Economics 101 textbooks. Or, if they're ready to get their noses out of books and theoretical models altogether, they could consult with a few street-smart business owners, either legitimate or otherwise, for some advice about how wages influence employment in the real world. Recent studies of Chicago's Black inner-city youth indicate that joblessness is at alarming levels, perhaps as high as 80 to 90% in many neighborhoods. Clearly, pushing up minimum wages over the years has done little to help the city's most vulnerable population, and has likely made matters even worse. Let's take one more short break, and then we'll come back to wrap up. To summarize, few things paint a more heartbreaking picture of the extraordinary failures of the Great Society programs from the 1960s and minimum wage laws than the image of young inner-city men and women joining gangs that terrorize their own neighborhoods at extraordinary risk to the young people who have few other options. The history of the United States, and indeed the world, is one of lifting masses out of poverty, not through minimum wages and government-directed programs, but rather through the risk-taking of entrepreneurs operating in free market systems. For a brief shining moment, Bill Clinton had the courage to try and turn his party away from the persistent economic and political failures of the previous 50 years. Unfortunately, since then, the Democrats have returned again and again to a playbook that has consistently failed their most vulnerable constituency. Zohran Mamdani's recent victory and the presidential aspirations of his most prominent supporters appear to signal that the party is once again heading down this dead-end path. Until the academics who educate our young voters and advise our young politicians admit these truths, it is hard to see how things could possibly change. Today, we face important challenges, like the socialist upsurge in the Democratic Party, but none that are greater than those we have overcome time and again throughout our storied history. Here's hoping that your day is as bright as America's future. If you found this helpful, please recommend it to at least one other person. If you'd like to learn more and to find links to my free On Wealth and Progress newsletter and my book, please visit my website, toddsheetswriter.com. Thanks again for your interest, and have a great day.